Thank you very much, Bess. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me, both all of you, everyone who is involved in that. It's a real honour and pleasure to be with you here. And there is one thing I could add, and that is I used to work for the Open University in England, in my so, you know, I'm pleased to be back with the Open University here today in Hong Kong. Right, so a social neuroscience perspective from antisocial to prosocial behaviour. So you should know I'm just a warm-up act for our illustrious speaker tomorrow. I will be here just talking about antisocial behaviour. And then we're going to be moving it on tomorrow, I think, for the next day after, into the more prosocial domain and empathy. But we'll come on to that a little bit later. So I'll just focus more on the social neuroscience of antisocial behaviour. I'll certainly be talking about interventions towards the end. Just to give you a little structure for what I'm saying in the next 2 hours or so, I'll start by talking about just early biological risk factors. Things that sort of early on in life raises the odds that a kiddie will grow up to become antisocial and criminal and violent. I'll then move on to, well, what brain mechanisms may be dysfunctional in these young kids who have these early risk factors for antisocial behaviour. And then lastly, I'll turn on to legal and societal implications of the social neuroscience field on antisocial behaviour. More specifically, I look at any implications for predicting future crime and violence in society, or predicting who amongst us may be aggressive and violent. Secondly, and I think you'll be more interested in this component, what about prevention implications? What can we do to change the brain basis to antisocial and criminal behaviour? And just lastly, what are the implications of this wider body of knowledge for our concepts of responsibility and also punishment? Okay, that's what I'm going to lay out. I'll start first of all by talking about early biological risk factors for later antisocial behaviour. And during the course of our interchange here, please feel free to stop me at any point in time and ask questions, clarifications, even by chance challenge me in what I'm having to say. Okay, early biological risk factors. Historically speaking, we go back to the father of criminology. This was a man in northern Italy. He was a doctor working in prisons. Cesare Lombroso. You may have heard the name of that individual. And Lombroso was fascinated by the notion that there may be a brain biological basis to the criminal offenders that he worked with in prisons. And he argued that these offenders have biological markers or stigmata which mark them out from the rest of us. I mean, Lombroso didn't have brain imaging in those days, you know, in the 1850s, brain scan prisoners. So what did he base this conclusion on, that they are physically different to the rest of us? Well, it was things like a single palmar crease. Lombroso argued that individuals with a single palmar crease are much more likely to become antisocial, criminal, and violent compared to normal individuals with two palmar creases. Yeah, can I have a look? Let's answer it like that. Two creases. Hey, you're all non-criminals here. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone with a single palmar? No, don't tell me the single. Another marker he found. A big gap between the first toe and the second toe. Don't take shoes off. And you know, in a way, it's laughable, isn't it? It's laughable. But surprisingly, we now know that what these are what we now call minor physical anomalies. And these are physical anomalies, very minor, very hard to see, which occur at about the end of the first trimester or the beginning of the second trimester of pregnancy, if there's maldevelopment of the fetus. And so we take these as an indirect indicator of maldevelopment of the brain, or some process that's interfering with normal development. Low-seated ears is one of them. So, for example, during fetal development, the ears are slightly lower on the head and they migrate up to their normal positions, again, at about the end of the first trimester of pregnancy. If there's some interruption to normal fetal development, those ears stay low. So we take those as this marker for maldevelopment of the fetus. And the important point to note here is that there are a number of investigators who have documented that antisocial children or juvenile delinquents or offenders have more of these minor physical anomalies than the rest of us, starting with a pivotal study in science by Halberstam and Victor. Yes, Danny Pine, a lot of investigators, Danny Pine from NIH has documented this as an association. So just there, we have a sense that even before the child is born, there's something that's messing up their brain in scientific vernacular, something messing up their brain early on in life, which may then predispose them to later antisocial behaviour. Is anyone born bad? Because that's what Prof was getting to. It sort of depends what we mean by that question. At one level, nobody's born bad. There's no destiny, of course, to crime and violence, as Prof argued. But are there factors early on in life which raises the odds of somebody becoming bad in life? Well, I would say yes. And I mean that literally, that a bad birth, for example, could predispose to later antisocial behavior. Why would I say that? Well, quite some time ago now, we did some work where we looked at birth complications in a sample of 4,000 births in Copenhagen, Denmark. And we divided those 4,000 births into 4 groups. The controls did not have birth complications and they did not have maternal rejection of the child. Maternal rejection of the child was assessed by having social workers go around to the homes of all the babies when they were 1 year old, doing an interview with the mum, and maternal rejection was measured in 3 ways. First, the mum didn't want the pregnancy. Second, she made an attempt to abort the fetus. She failed these up live male births. Thirdly, there was a break between the mother and the infant with respect to the infant being put in an institution, a hospital, for at least 3 months in the first germ. That's how we defined the social risk factor of maternal rejection of the child. Social risk factor? The biological risk factor is the birth complications like anoxia, lack of oxygen, that damages the infant's brain. So this group only had the maternal rejection. This group only had the birth complications. This group had the double whammy. They had the biological risk factor and the social risk factor. On the y-axis, you're looking at the rates of violence 18 years later in those infants. What we see, these 3 groups do not differ significantly, but this group differed to all of them. There's like a 3-fold increase in violence when individuals have both birth complications and maternal rejection of the child. So that's a study in Copenhagen, Denmark. American investigators wanted to ask, well, what about America? These are Caucasian babies. What about African American babies? So Picaro and Tibbets looked at this in Philadelphia and they got the same interaction effect. And that's also been found in, I think, Canada and also Sweden so far. So, that's another factor early on in life, a child suffering birth complications, especially when it's combined with a negative social environment. And again, the baby is responsible in that first year for that negative social environment. Is he? These are all male types. Okay, and what I should say is prenatal nutrition is another factor. So I'm talking about really early factors here. Come on in. Grab a seat. I have some seats over here. Poor nutrition even before the child is born. So in this study, anyone know what country that is? Which one? Yes, Holland, Netherlands, that's right. It's the Dutch family study, if anyone is familiar with this study, the Dutch family study. So the history here, we're at the end of World War II. Germany's pulling out of the Netherlands, and there's a food blockade on the country. So there are some mums there who are pregnant and they're on a poor diet. They have poor nutrition due to the lack of food supply. And you can see that the kids in those towns were pretty skinny, weren't they? So I want to highlight the work of Richard Neugebauer at Columbia University, an amazing epidemiological study. He looked at the offspring of pregnant mums, again, it's male offspring, mums who had poor nutrition due to the food blockade, compared to a group of mums who did not have the lack of food, a matched control group, matched on many background factors. And what Neugebauer found is that if a mum had poor nutrition during pregnancy, her offspring are 2.5 times more likely to grow up to have antisocial personality disorder, which is a psychiatric term basically meaning lifelong criminal offending. So here we go. This is another factor early on in the child's life. It's a biological factor, isn't it? Nutrition is a biological factor affecting the brain, but it's also social as well, isn't it? It gets to our point that we can't really divide biological from social. We use this as a shorthand term. But the point is, before the child is born, risk factors raising the odds that that individual is going to become antisocial. And I'm going to turn back to nutrition a bit later on when we turn to prevention implications from this etiological work of Neugebauer and others. Okay, so that's yet another factor, right? Yeah, birth complications, poor nutrition prenatally. Here's another one. Anyone who's an art buff here? Anyone who knows the artist here? Anyone? Any Renaissance person here? Van Gogh, like skull of a skeleton smoking a cigarette. That's the lovely name he gave to it. I looked at the names he gave to it. We know smoking is a killer, so it causes lung cancer. But it's a killer in another way. Because if a mum during pregnancy smokes, her offspring are again more likely to grow up to become violent offenders. So we know this from work. I'll give you one example. My postdoc student, Patty Brennan, she's got a sample of 4,000 males born again in Copenhagen, Denmark. That's Scandinavian data set again. And here, the pregnant mums are broken up into different groups. This group, the mums did not smoke any cigarettes during pregnancy. This group, the mum smokes 1 or 2 cigarettes, all the way up to mums who smoke more than a pack of cigarettes a day during pregnancy. On the y-axis, you have rates of violence offending at age 34. You get the same findings if we look at violence at age 18. What Brennan finds here is, you can sort of see it, right? A dose-response relationship. The more cigarettes the mum smokes, the higher the rates of violence. And I haven't got it down here, but she corrected for social confounds here. Because of course mums who smoke during pregnancy are a bit different to mums who don't smoke in terms of social classification. She corrected for the background variables that characterize these sort of mums. That didn't explain these findings. And there's more than 20 other studies that find just the same relationship. One scenario is that the carbon monoxide from the cigarettes is again shutting off oxygen to the fetus and negatively affecting fetal brain development. All the things I've talked about so far we think are impacting brain development at one level or another. We don't really know if it's the effect of cigarette smoking. We can't rule out the genetic confound. The genetic confound is that mums who smoke cigarettes don't care about their fetus. And the mum passes on that lack of caring to the fetus. And babies growing up with a lack of caring, or callous and emotional, maybe lacking empathy, maybe that's going to make them more likely, isn't it, to commit harm and suffering to others. So we can't rule that out. There's no question that everyone agrees, we don't know the mechanism, but everyone agrees that this is a risk factor, no question, for later antisocial behaviour. And again, It's coming before the child is born. Okay, what else? What else? Oh, just before I go on to what else, one thing we know from this study by Toro examined, brain scanned 50-year-olds who had been exposed to cigarette smoking during pregnancy with matched controls. And what Toro showed is reductions in function in the ventral region of the prefrontal cortex. We'll come back to that brain area a little bit later, but just to link these early risk factors to brain a little bit. But what else? That's what I was moving on to. Another one that I think you're familiar with is alcohol use during pregnancy. So I think you may be familiar with fetal alcohol syndrome. These are babies who are exposed to alcohol prenatally. This is an example of a baby with fetal alcohol syndrome. Craniofacial abnormalities. So there's a lack of development of the nasal bridge there. There are epicanthal folds. Ears are low-seated. Alcohol is a teratogen that can result in minor physical noise. This is the filtrum. So there's lack of development of the filtrum in these babies. Smaller head circumference. That's fetal alcohol syndrome. I want to highlight the work of Shue because she got together nearly 500 of these babies, followed them up over time, and these are the rates of delinquency, police contacts, and arrests in those individuals. So, we can see there again, these aren't small rates, are they, up to the age of about 15 there. And what's causing that? Well, let's not exclude social factors, right? Because the mom who's drinking, like a fish during pregnancy of alcohol, again, maybe she doesn't care too much about her fetus, and she's, and maybe she's not a good mom, right? And bad parenting can dispose to antisocial behaviour, can't it? But so that's one factor. But another factor is that alcohol is toxic to the brain. It's neurotoxic. It damages brain cells. So, for example, this is the brain of a baby that died when it was 6 weeks of age for reasons other than fetal alcohol syndrome. And that's the brain of a baby that also died at 6 weeks of age due to fetal alcohol syndrome. So although it's an extreme example, we can see the ravages that prenatal alcohol does to the brain. Now I want to sort of ask a question. Let's take a look at that. I want you to look at that little baby. I want to ask you a few questions. Does that baby have fetal alcohol syndrome? Yes, it does. You can see it in its face. Is that baby more likely to grow up to become a criminal offender? Yes, it is. We've seen that from Shue data. Was that baby responsible for the fact that its mother drank during pregnancy? No, it's not. Are we going to hold that baby responsible for the crimes it commits? Yes, we will. My question for you is that justice? Is that your sense of justice? It's not mine. If we don't blame that baby, though, if we don't hold that baby responsible, who are we going to hold responsible? Are we going to blame the mother? And that leads me to a case study of Jamila Falls, but it's a little bit similar. Jamila Falls was mum in Memphis, Tennessee. She gave birth to a lovely little girl on the 5th of July. The problem, though, is that on its birth, the baby tested positive for heroin and marijuana. So in a new law enacted in Tennessee, this is an assault of the mother on the fetus. Assault is the legal term that's used. And so Jamila is convicted for assault on her baby, and she's sentenced to 6 months in prison, which she serves. So again, the question I have for you here is that the right way that we should be going in the Tennessee mentality? Do we need more parental responsibility to protect the next generation of children? Or do people like Jamila Falls need help? She needs help and not handcuffs. that's, I think, one of the tensions that I think that we have in society here when we come to culpability. I'll circle back to this a little bit later. And in my mind, it leads on to like another question. Should parents need a license before they have children in order to make sure that they're good enough parents to treat their child at least a little bit better than the average pet dog is treated? Because, you know, sometimes parents don't treat their kids all too well. And I think it raises a question of before parents should have a license before they have children is these babies have a right for adequate paternal and maternal parenting, both from the father and the mother. And shouldn't we get a little bit tougher to protect the rights of the next generation? Counterpoint is, this sounds like a slippery slope to eugenics. Doesn't this give you a scary feeling to think about your right to have children? It sounds egregious to take away that right. Okay, so I've talked about early biological risk factors. Does anyone have any questions or comments at the moment on anything I've said so far? Okay, parental licensing? No.
My daughter asked me that question.
You're kidding?
Do you have
I haven't spoken
license?
to her now, yeah. Well, so she asked you the question. Can I ask why she asked you the question?
Well, she kind of thinks parenting is difficult.
Hey, it's a big responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you're quite right, because, you know, it's like driving a car, isn't it? We don't let anyone drive a car, cars don't care. So we require a license, don't we? You know, and you know, you're a licensed clinical psychologist, so like I would never go to you if you didn't have a license, would I? I mean, no.
So many professions.
Yeah. So yeah, because you know, I'm going to trust myself in you. But think about a baby trusting itself in its mum and dad. Isn't that a greater level of trust, you know? And what did you say to your daughter?
I said, of course, I went to school for it. But of course, there's no school for parenting.
There's no, should there be?
Until recently, we have more classes on parenting.
Yeah, I mean by the way, I think an important thing, I'm talking about these very early factors, and I don't want to be blaming violence and crime on women and pregnant women and what they do. Clearly not, and fathers do play a significant role. It's just that women are the ones who give birth, not men, and so when we look at these early factors, it's what the pregnant mum is doing and talking about how that notches up the chance of their offspring becoming antisocial. But anyway, these are some of the questions that sort of churn around in my mind. Any of the questions just about early risk factors, I've just sort of picked out a few. It's quite a bunch. Christina. Christina, I remember your name.
Thank you. And I'm just curious about
birth complications, yes.
Yes, about the paternal rejection. Is there any studies about paternal rejections or active father?
Maybe some studies. It's really paternal caring. You know, like the type of bonding, paternal, maternal. I've done limited studies on this, so I can't speak too much about it. But when I look at mother and father, I tend to find that the mother's caring is a more important predictor of the child than paternal. Does anyone want to chip in about why that may be? I mean, is it because it's more the mum that really interacts with the child in the important early years? Is that one of the reasons, you know, a bit more the dad's out to work, the mum's more at the home? Not that I'm saying that that's the right way that things should be, but could that be one reason? Or does anyone know, I mean, I think the people here in social work, anyone know about paternal rejection of the child? Anyone know about that? We certainly know that when parents leave the home, that can be helpful to the kid. If the parent is antisocial and there's divorce and the father leaves, well, the kid's behaviour improves. We know that. It's been someone by Moffat in the past. But excellent question there on the bonding side. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and again, I'm focusing on the mums here because of that early factor. Do you happen to know? This is what you want to say for. Do you happen to know anything more about the paternal side of, child socialization?
It's a little data because fathers don't participate in research.
We're not really studying fathers as much as we should.
I'm trying to recruit them. It's very hard because they just don't commit.
Don't want to come in.
Or often they're not around.
Yeah.
It's hard to find. You
It's-
don't know who the father is, really.
Yeah, it's a lacuna in our knowledge, isn't there? And there's certainly a greater need for looking at the father effects on the children. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll turn to brain mechanisms. Okay, we've talked about these early factors that mess up the brains of some kids and predispose them to later antisocial behaviour. So the next step in this is just to ask the question of, well, what brain areas may be dysfunctional in antisocial violent or driven psychopathic offenders? Okay, so I think some of you will know this individual, Phineas Gage. He was a builder, he's a railway worker, I think in 1851 in Vermont, and he had an accident where this metal rod was blasted through his skull. The rod entered, it was an explosion, basically. It was a foreman for the Great Western Railways. They were blowing up a big rock. He was using this metal rod to tamp down gunpowder, and the metal rod created a spark which ignited the gunpowder, shot the rod to his head. He was tilted down over the rod, so the rod went through his left cheek and came out right through the top of his head. I think the rod flew 100 feet or so. He was thrown down, of course, and you can see the damage that was done, but amazingly, he survived. The workers found, he was moving around after about a minute and mumbling. So they put him on an ox cart, they drove him to the nearest town, and they put him up in a hotel room. They called the doctor, and the doctor gave him rhubarb and castor oil. It was amazing rhubarb because, within weeks, Phineas Gage was back on his feet and he was creating a new life for himself. But the fascinating part of the study is that after the accident, as his friends and colleagues said, he was no longer Gage, their words. He was transformed like a Jekyll and Hyde from a normal, regulated railway worker to becoming impulsive, psychopathic, gambling. He lost all of his friends. He couldn't hold down his job anymore. He was disinhibited. He didn't become a psychopath, but he developed a psychopathic-like personality. It sets up for us a model that perhaps when there's damage to this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, well, that could result in impulsive, disinhibited behavior, which could be a prelude to violence. So that was a case study that I was always intrigued by, and I emigrated from England to go to California. I was 33 when I went to California. And I always think it's the same age Jesus was when he went to paradise. The sun, palm trees, beaches. But I also went to Los Angeles because there's a lot more violence there. I wanted to study murderers, and I was able to round up murderers in Los Angeles, put them all in a brain scanner, compare them to normal individuals to look to see do murderers have different brains functionally to the rest of us. And that was a study that I did way back in 1994 now. Got these 41 murders, 41 patrols. The key finding from that study sort of endorses that Phineas Gage model. So you're looking down on the brain, you've got a bird's eye view, and the warm colours indicate high glucose metabolism, meaning high brain function. Cool colours, blue and green, low glucose metabolism, low brain function. So this is the prefrontal cortex, well activated in the normal control. But in the murderer, you see a distinct lack of prefrontal activation. This is just an illustration of the finding. The overall finding was, as a group, the 41 murderers had lower frontal functioning compared to the normal individuals. And based on what we know from neurology in this part of the brain, we know that this part of the brain is involved in impulse control. We know it's involved in emotion regulation. Think of it as, we all get angry at times, don't we, right? We get angry at times. What stops us lashing out? You're wondering about this, aren't you? You're wondering what stops us lashing out. It's having a well-regulated, good frontal cortex that says, hey, step back a little bit. Take time out. Count to 10. This is the right time to act in this situation. It's like the guardian angel will behave, you know? But if the guardian angel is asleep, as it is in some murderers, well then the devil can come out. People can get killed. It's a risk factor. It's a brain risk factor for antisocial behaviour. A couple of important caveats on that statement. First of all, not all murderers, of course, show that poor frontal lobe function. So this was one of the murderers in my sample. This man was Randy Kraft. He was a serial killer, and this is his brain scan here. Randy killed 64 people in a 12-year period just south of LA, almost without being caught. And he was, like a number of serial killers, he was unlucky to be caught. He was just driving on the freeway one night, late at night, and he made, get this, he made an illegal lane change on the freeway. California Highway Patrol were there, they detected it, they pulled Randy over, and they only became suspicious when they found a dead body in the passenger seat. Otherwise, Randy was still being around. Yeah, get that, an illegal lane change. He must have been so annoyed, you know. Yeah, after 14 years getting away with it. Anyway, look at Randy's brain scan. I mean, he's got pretty good frontal lobe function, hasn't he? He's not got the poor frontal lobe function of the one-off murder. And to me, that's the exception that proves the rule. Because, you know, you need to have something good going for you to kill 64 people. And what Randy had good going for him is a well-regulated, functional prefrontal cortex, allowing him to plan, regulate, and control his behavior. You know, because he would take guys out, he would get them drunk, he'd put drugs in their drink, he'd have sex with them, he'd then kill them, and then he'd dump the body. And then he'd get into work next day as the computer consultant. You know, he had some street smarts there. And, you know, so in a way, it doesn't explain why Randy was a serial killer, but the point to make here is that not all murderers have poor frontal lobe function. Some, like Kraft, who plan, regulate, pretty good frontal lobe function. A second caveat is, using the brain scan, which we had, if you look at the colour patterns there, and try and compare it to these three groups. Just have which group would you put it under? Anyone hazard a guess which one? Doesn't match exactly any of those three, but which one? Yeah?
The second one matches, and the third one doesn't match.
It's a what?
The second one, the multiple murder.
Oh yeah,
matches
yeah,
the-
right. Because you're looking at the thalamus here, it's well activated. Good frontal lobe functioning, occipital functioning, pretty good. Temporal function too matches that. Right. Yeah, so people would tend to put it there. The point about this scan is that it's my scan. Brain imaging to make a diagnosis. There are some ostensibly normal people like myself with abnormal brain function. And conversely, there are abnormal people. There are some murderers with totally normal brain function. There's no one-to-one relationships here at all. Nevertheless, despite those caveats, we are beginning to get some clues about what brain areas, when dysfunctional, could predispose to later antisocial behavior. Okay, so the other point here is that if I divide the murderers up into those who are like Randy, who plan and regulate their homicides, the proactive murderers, compared to reactive murderers who killed impulsively, they killed in emotion, then it's this group who are having the poor frontal lobe function. So that's another caveat again. It's not a risk factor for all violence. We think it's more especially a risk factor for more impulsive, emotional homicides, the hot-blooded homicides rather than the cold-blooded homicides. So yeah, that's another important caveat to make. Any questions so far then on that? one key brain area that's sort of involved.
I'm wondering about transgenerational.
Intergenerational transmission of violence,
Yeah.
right? From, you mean at the social neuroscience level, going from, that's a really good question. On brain imaging, brain functioning or cognitive, I don't know of research that's mapped that. I mean, we know well that there's the intergenerational transmission of violence, but can we pin it down to neurobiological functioning? Not sure. What I can say is that there is a biological measure, the best replicated actually biological risk factor for antisocial behaviour is actually a low resting heart rate. And there we've clearly seen intergenerational transmission of that. That's partly accounting for why sons of criminal offenders are more likely themselves to perpetrate antisocial behaviour. Both groups, there's low resting heart rate, there's heritability for low resting heart rate. That's passed on. But in terms of brain, no, I don't know of work. Anyone else know of work at all? In case I'm missing anything. Because I'll tell you what, I'm not on top of everything in the literature. And by the way, do interject if you've got something to throw into. I appreciate it. Yeah, but good question. Yeah, the intergenerational transmission, the neurobiological level. Again, we need more research, as they always say. Yeah. Are you thinking of it would be interesting to look at the parents of these individuals? Again, look to see if any transmission from parents to child could be accounted for by common denominators in the brain. It's an intriguing question, isn't it? Okay, so what I want to do now is I'm going to be turning to another brain area, which is the amygdala. But before doing that, I want to just introduce you to psychopathy, and I think many of you, some of you will be familiar with psychopathic behaviour. If not, this is an instrument which is well used to assess psychopathy. It's often used in prison samples. It's called the psychopathy checklist. And so the psychopath, what is the psychopath? This is what I'm getting at. Well, psychopaths, there's like 4 clusters of traits. There's the arrogant, deceitful factor, or facet, so to speak. These are people who are glib, grandiose, pathological liars. They con and manipulate people. Can you think of any politicians like that? Hey, come on. Donald is not here to Donald. Okay. Next factor, deficient affect, lapse remorse, shallow affect, callous, they have no empathy for other people, they don't accept responsibility. Do you think of any politicians like that? Okay, she should make fun of Donald. Impulsive, they're seeking stimulation all the time, they're impulsive, they're responsible, they're big people, they're mercenaries. These people are at the top of the antisocial pyramid, and as the antisocial facet, they show a lot of antisocial behaviour. They show it early on, juvenile delinquency, even as kids, they're impulsive, lacking self-control. And as adults, they have criminal versatility. And, when they're released, what do? They go and commit another offence, and they end back, in the same prison that they started from. So that's psychopathy. I'm introducing this because I want to turn a little bit to psychopaths in particular and look at brain factors that are associated with psychopathy. And just before I do that, because I can get really boring in giving a talk, I'm going to show you just a little 2-minute video clip of this person, Kruger, who we would characterize as a psychopath. Just 2 minutes. As you see, he's a schoolboy when he's arrested. Why was he arrested? Well, he killed kids. He killed kids at school. So I'm going to show you, he's been impressed on his life. I'm going to show you just a short 2-minute clip when he's much, much, much older. And what I want you to do is, if we go back to these traits, I'd like you to see if you can identify some of these traits in that 2-minute clip. Because to me, it's a 2-minute clip, but actually, it's really short. It illustrates like 5 or 6 or 7 of these psychopathic features. Okay, so let's see.
As for Kruger, he had turned his attention on another patient at Brockville Dennis Kerr.
There was another patient of whom I was inordinately fond of, both sexually and emotionally. In other words, I was in love with this person. But he said to me, nobody can pull the wool over my eyes, and nobody can defeat me. I'm too smart. Well, that became a challenge that I measured up to.
In 1991, Kruger had secretly persuaded another former mental patient, Bruce Hamill, to help him murder the man who had rejected him.
I did not have the physical strength left to do it on my own. But he was a younger man, we were best friends. So I talked him into it. And he did it.
On Kruger's first day pass in 35 years, they lured Dennis Kerr to a secluded part of the hospital grounds on the pretext that they would give him money. It was a savage murder in which Kerr was repeatedly stabbed. Kruger's thoughts on why he did this are very disturbing.
And what was going through your mind at the time? This was someone you loved, so why?
Curiosity, actually. And an anger. Because he had rebuffed all my advances. I just wanted to know what it felt like to kill somebody.
But you'd already killed 3 people.
Yes, but that was years and years and years ago.
Yeah, so, what we have with Kruger is a number of different psychopathic traits, or at least how I see it. If you look at these traits, do they ring bells to you in terms of that video? Deception, need for stimulation. Did you see any of those traits in the video?
He thought that he was smart.
He thought he was smart. He had this grandiosity, didn't he? Yeah, that's very good. He had that grandiosity. Any other thing in the video that links to any of these traits? Any other pieces of that video too?
He didn't show any remorse for what
Yeah,
he did.
exactly right. He really didn't show remorse, did he? Or any care.
Yeah, I killed but I was 10 years.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that that killing, that's an interesting feature of the psychopath, because she picked him up on why did you kill, or wanted to know what it was like killing, and so she really pulled him out there. But you've already killed. Psychopaths, when they're boxed in, are very quick and clever with the comeback. Oh, that was years ago. It's like that. He didn't have to think about it. So that's a bit of that sort of glibness that psychopaths have in their communication. But yeah, very good. Picked out. Anyone else pick out any one of these points? So he's the first day he's been released, and he's revoking his releases. First day he's out, he kills. So he's got that. Do you think he shows that need for stimulation? He claims he wants to know what it's like to kill. The conning manipulation. He cons another individual to do the killing for him. Think of that. I mean, that's just pretty incredible, really. The grandiosity. This other guy had got the better of him in some way. He wanted to show who's on top, didn't he? He said that. Does he show that grandiosity, the narcissism in psychopaths? That shallow effect on sexuality. The words he says is, there was a man I was inordinately fond of, both sexually and emotionally. And then as an afterthought, he says, in other words, I was in love. You normally say, I was in love with him. But now, love it's got a different meaning to a psychopath. They're thinking of the sex, less so concept of love. Anyway, that's just a little brief clip there about to try and illustrate what psychopathy is. And I think the core of this is the first comment made, is the emotional deficit. The lack of feeling, the callousness. Right? And we think of the lack of empathy. psychopaths do. And that's something that I think we're most intrigued with. Why do these psychopaths really have emotions which are very different to the rest of us? Why are emotions so shallow? Why don't they have deep and meaningful relationships with people? And one brain area we get to here is the amygdala. Because the amygdala is a part of the brain that's really very central to emotions. Having emotions like love, empathy, and fear as well. So we were interested in looking at the amygdala in psychopaths, and this is one of my graduate students who compared 27 psychopaths with 32 non-psychopaths, and she's imaging the amygdala here. This is the left and right amygdala, and what she's finding overall is that the psychopaths as a group have about an 18% volume reduction in the amygdala compared to the non-psychopaths. If you're interested, the blue indicates which specific area of the amygdala is structurally deformed in psychopaths. And Jan did this because the amygdala, it's not one structure, it's 13 structures in the amygdala. And what she was doing is parceling out which nuclei are structurally impacted. It's not all of them. It's the central nucleus of the amygdala, the basolateral and the lateral nucleus of the amygdala. So, why do psychopaths lack emotion? Is it because they have a physical impairment in the amygdala, the leader of the orchestra when it comes to emotion in the brain? That's what we're sort of getting at there. Big problem with imaging data is it's correlational, isn't it? We have these adult psychopaths, we assess their psychopathy, and then at the same point of time we assess the brain. What's coming first? You know, we'd like to think that impairments to the amygdala, probably early on in life, predispose the individual to callous and emotional psychopathic behaviour. But could it be the other way around? You know, could a psychopathic way of life result in structural changes to the amygdala? That's not unrealistic to imagine, because we do know there are key links between social experience and the amygdala physically. So Hansen did a study on kids who were low SES, or kids who had been abused, or kids who had been neglected. 3 different groups of kids with social deprivation, and in all 3 of those groups there was a volume reduction in the amygdala. The amygdala was shrunken physically in size. So we know the social environment could be one of the reasons, you know, why these individuals have a structural impairment to the amygdala. So it could be that leading a psychopathic way of life and the social circumstances of that way of life could be resulting in the brain impairment, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. So far, we haven't done studies of just young kids, like 3-year-old, 4-year-old kids, early on in life, to assess the amygdala and then see if that predisposes to criminal behavior. We haven't had that. So the closest we've come to, or at least my group have come to, is to take a proxy for amygdala functioning. Proxy for amygdala functioning, fear conditioning. That's what we use, because we know fear conditioning, the control for fear conditioning comes in the central nucleus, basolateral nucleus of the amygdala. So, to introduce you to this study, this is a study that we did in Mauritius, which is a small tropical island in the Indian Ocean. It's a place I've been going to study kids since 1988. And in this study, we have 3-year-old kids, and we have 2,000 3-year-old children, and these are kids born in 2 towns in Mauritius. Flatqua, Catchable. So it's a birth cohort. So when they were age 3, they all came into the lab, were sat on the mum's lap, and we were measuring fear conditioning. So fear conditioning, think of fear conditioning, familiar with Pavlov's dogs, association learning. Thank you, yeah, nodding thanks. But if you're not familiar with fear conditioning, think of it as, this is really crude, but fearful fearlessness. Think of it that way. It's a bit indirect, but to get over what fear conditioning is about, think of it that way. So we're measuring fear conditioning of these kids. So we're presenting them with something that's noxious over headphones, and we're measuring their sweat rate. It's called skin conductance recording. It's putting electrodes on the fingers to measure. You pass an electrical current between the two electrodes. The kid can't feel it. It's innocuous. And you're measuring how well the electrical current is conducted. The more the kid sweats, the better the conductivity. We then follow up these 3-year-old kids until they're age 23. We find out which ones have become criminal offenders. We have 137 who were caught and convicted. They're matched 2 to 1 with controls matched on sex, matched on ethnicity, and 11 indicators of social request. So this is my graduate student for this study. So then now let's go backwards in time to age 3. And then let's compare these groups on fear conditioning. Remember, fear conditioning is a proxy for amygdala function. This is fear conditioning on the y-axis, good fear conditioning, poor fear conditioning. The blue bars are controls, the green bars are the tots who grow up to become criminal offenders. And what we found there is a significant difference. So the normal kids show good fear conditioning, but the 3-year-olds who grow up to become criminals show poor fear conditioning. I don't know if you're familiar with effect sizes, Cohen's D. Effect size here is about 0.35. If you're not familiar with effect sizes, 0.2 is a small effect, 0.5 is a medium effect, 0.8 is a large effect. It's pretty crude, isn't it? But that's the metric we tend to use. So 0.35 is a smallish effect, isn't it? So, what we're showing here is poor fear conditioning at age 3, an indirect indicator of amygdala functioning, is predisposing to criminal offending 20 years later. One of my graduate students published a paper in the American Journal of Psychiatry. They ran an editorial on the study, a critique. They got another scientist in to critique the study, and that was written by Philippe Sturzer. And this is the title of his critique, Born to be Criminal. What do we make of these early biological risk factors for crime? You've got a wry smile on your face, haven't you? Because I think I know what you're thinking. So Sturzer says, whoa, hold on a bit, come on. Neurobiological markers for crime. Well, we've got to be really careful about this because they could be used to stigmatize kids, right, who are perceived as a threat to society. And Sturzer, you're nodding your head, I agree with you, Sturzer's right. We've got to be ultra careful with something like this. Have to. But Sturzer goes on to say, yeah, but neurobiological research is giving us a new window into the etiology of future crime and violence. And Sturzer's last sentence, which I want you to evaluate for me, is, he says, so let's use this knowledge to benefit those kids at greatest risk for a criminal career, and let's design interventions tailored to their needs. You're nodding your head. So you think, yeah, tough as it may be, we've got to do something. And the best time is in the early years of child development. That's when we need these interventions. And we need to help those kids who are going off the rails, right? They need help. So let's give it pretty early on. Do you have any other reflection? Or I think that's what you're sort of nodding, so I'm assuming that's what you think. Can you elaborate a little bit more on your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a clear psychologist, and mostly I focus on helping children with challenges. So to me,
sorry, you're helping children with
challenges.
Challenges, yeah, great.
Challenges
Fantastic. So you're providing programs to these kids who are challenged.
And I'm interested in that because when we correct them at that early stage, we saw so many problems as well.
Mm-hmm.
In their older stages.
Yeah.
So, well, to me, I'm all for kids.
Yeah. And whatever we can do early on to help them, help the parents, and help people down the road, future victims, right? To do good in society. Yeah. So that's one perspective. So you share Philippe Sturzer's perspective on that. Can anyone join that chorus or give an alternative perspective of what we think we might do? with this type of knowledge? I know it's not an easy question, is it? It's difficult. But I'm sure, you know, do you have perspective? I can't think you're all neutral. Can't think you're all neutral. And come on, be brave. I know it's not easy, but oh, your lips are sealed. Yes. Oh, I got a drink here. I'll come back to this. Yeah, so if you can't hear, that the thought is, well, how would they feel if they know they're being tested and they know that, yeah, and after the task, we'll take those kids with, let's say, throw them into a functioning, put them into some type of intervention. You're asking, well, what would that kid think? My answer is that kid's not going to think anything going through. You know, put them into some intervention, which is nice for kids. Like maybe the type of things that you might do. I think the kids will be fine with it. But I don't know about parents. But I think maybe what you're asking is, how do you think they would feel? How would anyone feel if they were again? What if you're a parent of, you know, a kid who's been identified at the age of 3, and you say, well, is prone, you know, is prone to social behaviour. Yeah.
Well, to add to the question, how will society also feel or think about these kids? Because most of the time, that's where the problem starts. When the stigmatization starts, then we try to isolate or.
Just so I understand, are you talking about, this is when stigmatization starts, that when a kid goes off the rails, it's going to become almost a self-fulfilling prophecy for that kid because he's identified as antisocial and he gets stigmatized. He becomes more antisocial in reaction to the stigmatization. What an interesting perspective. I've actually not heard that, but I follow you because I think where you would criticize this is to say, couldn't these programs stigmatize those kids? And you get a self-fulfilling prophecy. You put the kid into the program. You know, it's a crime campaign program for young kids. Imagine it's labelled in that way, and that could be a stigmatizing effect. What you are saying, though, if you don't do anything, that kid's going to get stigmatized for that runaway behaviour. So, at both levels, you can argue the stigmatization, no matter which direction you go. If you don't do it, yeah, the kid's going off the rails, they're going to get stigmatized for that, and you've done nothing. Yeah, I'm intrigued. Come on, you've got to jump into it. Yeah. Have a swig of water first.
Without any vitamins.
Without vitamins. I don't have my vitamins at home.
I mean, I think it's tricky because I think you're right that once you stigmatize kids, right, like you do treat them differently. But what we also know is that what we're doing now is we're punishing them, and that's just making everything worse. So punishing kids is just really not into
Or even neglecting them even more.
even neglecting them, punishing them, that's just not helping. And their punishment is sensitive anyway, and so that's not helping them. So
Punishment is sensitive, that's right, like a fear condition. It's tough. You know, I think this is there are easy answers here.
it's hard to have compassion for these kids also, right? It's difficult. So overcoming, because they're difficult kids, they're antisocial.
You don't really like them, they're
You
not
don't really
likable
like them, and
kids.
so it's hard to generate empathy for kids who don't have empathy.
That's interesting. It's hard for us to develop empathy for kids who don't have empathy. It's really true, isn't it? It's really true. I don't know if you've seen this in your work.
Yeah.
You know, the difficult kids. Well, it's great that you're doing the work you're doing and trying, you know, to really help kids, you know, at greatest risk, you know, and try and benefit them in whatever way we can. You're doing social interventions, right? Yeah. I think what's different here is that we're fine with doing social interventions early on. But when we're talking about a biological risk factor, and the logic is, well, if these kids have poor amygdala functioning, what we need to do is change their brains to make sure that the amygdala functioning is better. There's something about going into the Holy of Holies, going in to the brain, changing the brain, that we're uncomfortable with. And yet we're not uncomfortable with psychotherapy, even though psychotherapy changes the brain. So I'm curious about that. I don't know if anyone has any reflections on that. You know where I'm coming from? Psychotherapy, cognitive behavior therapy, that changes the brain in depressed patients. So it improves the brain, puts the brain back to normal, for example. But somehow if we did brain intervention, it wouldn't seem right. You know what? Let's hold on that question. Let me go a little bit further here. I'll stick with the amygdala and I want to turn to moral decision makers, because we also know the amygdala is centrally involved in making moral decisions. It's not just the only brain area, but it's part of the neural circuitry involved in moral decision making. We know that from a lot of brain imaging research now, which gives moral dilemmas to people like you in a brain scanner and looks at what brain areas are activated when you are contemplating making a moral decision. Example. Right, you're in the brain scanner, give you a moral dilemma, and it's the trolley dilemma. It's everyone's favourite dilemma, right? The trolley dilemma. You've got to be familiar with it. If you're not, this is you. You're on a footbridge, right? And there's a runaway trolley that's going to wipe out these 5 men. Standing next to you is a gentleman who's quite large. The only way that you can save the 5 guys is to push the stranger off the bridge. No, he dies, but he stops the train. And you save the 5 lives. The question in the scanner is, would you push the corpulent gentleman off the bridge? Think about it. Don't say anything. I want you to think. Think. What would you do? Are you going to stand there and do nothing? Come on. Maybe. What are you talking about? No. You have 5 minutes going to. It's a no-brainer. It's 5 to 1. 1 dies, you save 5 lives. Utilitarian, moral decision-making. Push him on. Come on. I don't know what you're thinking about. On the other hand, I shall not kill. Right? Hence the moral dilemma, of course. I'm less interested in what your response would be, actually, but I'm more interested in how you feel when you think about that. For many of us, it makes us feel uncomfortable. Our emotions pick up, and it's partly because the amygdala is activated when we are contemplating these moral dilemmas. One of my graduate students at the time, Andrea Glenn, put a bunch of men varying in psychopathy scores into the scanner, looking at moral decision making, and we just look at the Gratia. Every red dot is a person. They differ in how psychopathic they are on the psychopathy self-report scale. And she's measuring the amygdala activation in the scanner to those personal moral dilemmas. And she finds a correlation. It's a small study, by the way, you've got to be careful. It's a negative correlation, meaning the more psychopathic the individual is, the lower the amygdala activation in the scanner to a moral dilemma. Now, psychopaths do very immoral things. Why are they doing that? Maybe it's because their amygdala isn't firing as much as it should be when contemplating a moral dilemma. So they're more likely to commit an immoral act. And really, that finding by Andrea sort of raises a question, at least in my mind, so I don't know about themselves, but it goes like this. We know psychopaths, they know right from wrong. They know it's wrong to kill. They know it's wrong to rob a store. But do they have the feeling? Do they have the emotional feeling of what is right and wrong? It goes like this, if the amygdala is the emotional engine which drives moral behaviour. The feeling of what is right and wrong, to some extent, drives, I think, moral behaviour. And if the amygdala engine is burnt out in psychopaths, for reasons beyond their control, then, is it right for us to blame psychopaths as much as we do for the acts that they perpetrate? Because, psychopaths don't ask to be born with an amygdala that's 3 sizes too small. No, they don't ask for that. And if that's partly a causal agent in their behaviour, then again, I come back to, should we be punishing psychopaths? Sounds crazy, but it makes me wonder. Come back to that again. So, terms of prediction. Coming towards the end here, we've got another half an hour to go. So, any questions so far before we get on to the legal society? Yeah.
So, like, for your amygdala finding, going back to the video, the person in the video, he still felt injustice caused to him, right? So,
he felt what?
He felt that injustice was being...
Yeah.
So he felt rejected by this other person.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not a feeling, but it's some kind of understanding. So when it's directed towards the individual, it's still some kind of...
Yeah, it's his ego. His ego was pricked, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he has feelings.
He has feelings.
He has feelings for himself.
There's
You're
a
right.
moral component that's self-directed that's somewhat intact, maybe? Or not intact, but sensible or
yes.
something.
You're right. And we talk about psychopaths, we say that they lack feeling. Well, actually, they do have feelings. What we would say is that, and you'll go to this in your talk more, they lack feelings for other people. They have feelings for themselves. In fact, it's all reversed around. Whatever feeling they have for other people, is their feeling for themselves is boosted instead. Yeah, and hence the egocentricity and the narcissism.
If you were to flip these kind of questions around and say, like, well, if you were the person in the moment,
Give them some sense of empathy, yeah.
or some kind of self-directed questioning.
Yes. And when you give psychopaths those dilemmas, they make the more utilitarian moral decision. They're more likely to push the big guy off the bridge. That's true. But I think we're getting to what you're talking about, saying, what can we do to reverse this empathy, emotional impairment? Because there's maybe something going on there. It's not that the amygdala is wiped out. No. We're talking about a reduction, a relative reduction in emotionality in these psychopaths. But as you say, they've got emotionality for themselves and their well-being. So there's something there in that neural circuitry that's intact. And maybe we can do something to remold that circuitry in some way to give them more of a feeling for other people. Yeah, it's a great point. Thank you. Yes?
So do a psychopath have the freedom of choice? For example, in the model, do they have freedom of choice A, B, or C?
Is the psychopath's freedom of choice A, B, and C? What's A and B and C?
For example, A is good, B is bad, or C is not so good. In the situation, do they have the freedom of choice to make the decision?
Right, okay, so this is a really philosophical question.
Yeah.
Whoa, I'm going to fall off the bridge. I'm going to get dizzy here. But I'm going to come back to your question right at the end of my talk. So if you wait to the end of the talk, can you remind me to have another interchange? And then, good question.
I think there is only a very narrow gap between when we talk about potential threat to the society with the potential need to the change.
Just to clarify, the threat to society is?
You say the neurobiological markers.
Risk factors, yeah.
They reflect it could be a potential threat to the society of someone. But I think there's only a narrow gap between the potential threat to the society or someone could really have the potential to change the world in another way.
Like Donald?
Yes. So if you in his 3 years age of time and found that he had some biological marker, then you change it, then someone may not be able to be a president in this stage.
Well, you know,
We don't know, although we don't know how it changed the world in which direction, we
Yes.
don't know. But I think it would be very hard to say that when you talk about whether it is a potential threat or whether it is a potential change in another way.
Well, I think to put it in other words, I think one way I can think of it is, what if I had a magic wand and I could take away fearlessness and psychopathy in society? I think one way to look at that is to say, well, is there a loss? Is there a loss to society that sometimes we need callous, unemotional, to some degree impulsive individuals to lead the way? You know, I often think that, you know, in times of peace, we put psychopaths in prison. In times of war, we want them on the front line because they'll have no conscience, no hesitation in pulling the trigger and kill. Well, we can come back to that about, you know, about when we get to the intervention. What I should do actually is come on to prediction. You know, what about prediction? Actually, I'm going to skip this case. Interesting case. I'll just let me tell you that. No, I'll skip this. I'll skip clinical person. Right. Coming on to this study by Dustin Pardini at University of Pittsburgh, and I was involved in the study, but really this is Dustin's work here. An interesting study that he did. He brain scanned men in the community, adult males in the community, and measured the volume of the amygdala, the brain area we've been talking about. Remember, lower amygdala volume is a risk factor for later crime and violence and psychopathy. And then what he did is he let them, you know, after the brain scan, he followed them up for 3 to 4 years to find out which ones had committed violent criminal acts, right? And he divided the subject into those with lower amygdala volumes from the brain scan and those with higher amygdala volumes. And this is what he found. Focus your attention here. This is the left amygdala. That bluish group are those men who had lower amygdala volumes when they were brain scanned. And the 57% refers to, in the next 3 months, 57% of that group had committed a violent criminal act. That's compared to the men with high amygdala volumes, where the rate of violent offending was only 18%. So he's getting like a threefold difference over these groups. So what he's showing here is that there can be added value in predicting who's going to commit violence in the future by bringing into the prediction equation brain imaging, in this case, a simple measure of volume of the amygdala. Now, that's just a beginning study. Of course, it needs replication and extension. The question I have for you is, could we go in that direction in the future? Because at the moment, we just use social variables to assess violence risk. Let's take, you know, inmates in prison, and you wanted to make a decision of, do you let some out early because they're low risk, or do you keep some in because they're high risk? At least in California, we use an instrument which has social variables, like sex. You know, males are more likely to recidivate. If the male is not married, he is more likely to recommit a violent criminal act. If he doesn't have work to go out, he's more likely to come back. What if we added into those social measures biological measures like this to try and predict who amongst us is most at risk for future violence? Because we haven't done it yet. If we did do, putting together the biological with the social, would we do a better job of predicting future violence? And the idea would be, if we can predict future violence, then we can do something to stop it, potentially. Right? We could perfect in theory. And I think the question would be, well, what would we do? Anyone seen that movie, Minority Report? Tom Cruise, I don't know the movie now. Yeah, you're nodding your head. So it's like stopping crime before it starts, right? By, you know, arresting the person before they've committed the crime and detaining them. So that's maybe the scary side of this, whether maybe in the future by putting together biological and social variables, we'll do a better job of predicting violence, and maybe we can use that knowledge sensibly with prisoners, but what if we turn that knowledge on to people in the community to find out who amongst you is at risk for committing future violence? If we were to do that, I'd be one of the very first people to be locked up. My place. So I don't keep on the prevention side at all. Now, you know, there's a lot. This is a shopping list of biological risk factors for later antisocial and violent behaviour. And my question is, you know, what if by taking those biological measures, we can do a better job of predicting violence? So I was involved in a studio debate on the BBC. What I had to say wasn't so interesting, but what I was interested in is an exchange between Shue who is the leader of Liberty in the United Kingdom, and Jeremy Paxman, who is the BBC interviewer. So it was a program about a what-if program. What if in the future we could do a lot better job of predicting who's violent? And in this scenario in the future, you get 10-year-old kids who are violence prone, and you create a new intervention program for them to change their biology as well as their psychology. In this debate, Jeremy Paxman, the interviewer, said to Shue, so if science could predict 100% who is going to commit a violent act, would it be legitimate to act before they commit that crime? Chakrabarty says, I would have to say that in a liberal society of human beings and not animals, my answer to your question would be no. So Paxman comes back and he says, so someone could have been potentially killed by this person despite the fact that that life could have been saved. Even if science can do it 100%, you would still say it's wrong? And Chakrabarty's boxed in here, but she comes back and she says, we also have to look at the kind of society that we live in. Even while the risk-free society, drama and illusion that it may be, is touted by popular politicians like Donald, there is a huge cost to our way of life and to the kind of liberal democracy that I say we want to live in. Now, I think at one level Chakrabarty is wrong. She could have saved a life, but I think in another way she's right. Because if you go along this line, where does it end? Where does it end? The Minority Report, there'll never be perfect prediction. If we take action like this, indefinite detention, locking up those people before they commit a violent act, where does civil liberties go? It goes on this scrap heap. And that's the concern that I think we've got. But I think you're also saying, and I think some of us would say, but we also need to act. There's a tension there, because I agree with that too. I'm not quite sure which way to go on that, but I just want to plant that in your minds for your reflection and thoughts. Prevention. So I think this is a bit more important for you here. Okay, so truly speaking, what I'm talking about is bad brain, bad behaviour. If that's true, the logic would be, what can we do to improve the brain, to improve behaviour? Let's get into the holy holies and let's change the brain. Let's change your essence. That's the approach that I'm moving to here. Let me say that I began this all the way back here. It was back in Mauritius. So we had an experimental intervention where 100 kids were put into an enrichment program early in life at age 3. It was for 2 years. Don't know if it's the type of thing that you do in your work. I'll tell you what my work was. So these kids, for 2 years, they got better nutrition, they got more physical exercise each day, and they got a cognitive stimulation. And they were compared to match controls in Mauritius who just didn't get this enrichment. Get the pictures. We followed the kids up and we assessed brain functioning at age 11, and that's just criminal behaviour at age 23. We looked at those two things. So first thing, following up the kids who got the enrichment compared to the control kids, brain functioning. There's the kid, electrode cap measuring EEG, the electroencephalogram, and also skin conductance orienting, measure of attention. So in terms of brain functioning, the kids who went into the enrichment, this is delta activity, theta, alpha, beta, this is EEG, this is fast wave, this is slow wave. The kids who went into the intervention showed a reduction in slow wave activity. Kids have a lot of slow wave EEG. The brains haven't matured too well. When your brain matures, it moves into fast wave activity right now. Like I'm at beta activity. I'm firing on all cylinders. You're a little bit on the sleepy side. You're sort of down here a little bit, just like kids would be. Beta activity, delta. So the kids who went into the enrichment, they showed a reduction in slow wave activity. In other words, their brains were more aroused, more alert. In fact, at the age 11, these kids in the enrichment had a brain function which was 1.1 years more mature than the control group, who did not get that enrichment, nutrition, exercise, and cognitive stimulation. That's in terms of brain function, the EEG, in terms of skin conductance orienting, a measure of attention. The enriched group are the red line, blue lines. Whether you present them with speech stimuli or just plain tongue stimuli, these kids went into the enrichment, had more orienting, more attentional processing. So in terms of basic brain functioning and attentional processing, the enrichment enhanced their brains. Now, that's age 11. Take the same kids, follow them to age 23. The control showed a 36% rate of criminal offending compared to the enriched group, who showed a 23% rate of offending. Effect size significant, effect size is small, is 0.26. But there again, you're going from an intervention between ages 3 and 5 years to crime 20 years later. So of course there's a lot more to changing crime and violence in society than that. But that's a little bit. But a little bit that can go a long way. But really, that's the sort of introduction to how I sort of got started in this. And one of the components of that enrichment was nutrition. I want to turn to nutrition now. So, let's take a look at this lady here. No, she doesn't have fetal alcohol syndrome. I'd like to ask you, who is this lovely lady? And I'll give you a little clue. What happened to the early hours of this morning? If, you know, she was a queen, and she'd be so, if she was alive today, she would be so happy about what happened in the early hours of this morning. Anyone know who this queen is?
Marie Antoinette.
Marie Antoinette! Thank you. And what was she reputed to have said when the French peasants were baying for her blood? She said, anyone? Marie Antoinette, the French peasants going to tear her heart out. And what did she say? I'm giving you a history lesson, aren't I? If they have no bread, then let them eat cake. Yeah. Yes. So I think she was a smart cookie, Marie Antoinette. I think she had it on the nose. Nutrition, better nutrition is going to stop violence. That was her message. And it's not just food for thought, but it's food for court. Increasingly, magistrates and the legal profession are getting more interested in links between nutrition and crime. And, you know, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's not going to be any silver bullet that's, you know, going to stop crime and violence. But is there a golden pot, omega-3, that can do a little bit to reduce aggressive behavior? I'm not really serious. Feel better already. Well, so that's something that we've been looking at. Omega-3, a long-chain fatty acid critical for brain structure and brain function. And what put us onto that is data by Joe Bibler. It's correlational data. He plotted homicide rates in 26 countries throughout the world, and he found a correlation. So on the y-axis, you have homicide rates in these countries. On the x-axis, seafood consumption pounds per person per year. Correlation. The more fish you eat, lower the homicide rate. What are you laughing at? Hey, I believe this. I don't know if you believe it. You think it's all fishy, don't you? I mean, example, you know,
Japan
Japan.
has very high suicidal rate.
What?
Japan has very high suicidal rate.
Some of
Japan.
that.
What a high suicidal rate.
Suicide.
Suicide.
But, and I know he's talking about homicide, but it's
Yeah, well, that's, how high are they in the world research?
top 10, top 5.
Well, that doesn't count. We're not killing anyone. Homicide rate's really low, right?
Oh,
Okay. No, but you may have another point. Or maybe they're not killing and maybe internalizing. Yeah.
just curious.
Yeah, no, but actually, I think that's a good point. I mean, this isn't going to apply to suicide necessarily. But just to illustrate, yeah. Whereas, you know, in Eastern European countries, low seafood consumption, higher homicide rates. And let's see, where's... Oh, here's Hong Kong, right? Yeah. So I think you're the fourth highest in the world, by the way, on seafood consumption. You're the low homicide rates. Well, but I know why you're laughing. It's because you're saying, come on, this is correlational. Correlation is not causation. And you're absolutely right. You're another smart cookie saying not. Okay. So what we need are randomized controlled trials that manipulate omega-3 consumption, right? And look to see if it changes aggressive behavior. So that's something I've been doing again in Mauritius. So these are some findings from 2015. So we took 200 kids. We randomized them into two groups. One group get a fruit juice drink each day containing a whole gram of omega-3. It's only 200 milliliters. It's smaller than your carton. It's like it's a carton. How many units have you got in there? How many is that one? 375. And ours is 200. It's just about half the size of this carton. Thank you very much. I won't speak. Mike. And then the other group get randomized to have the same fruit juice drink, but it does not contain omega-3. And then it's 6 months they have this for. The kids are getting it, they're age 8 to 16, and we're assessing their behavior at 0 months, 6 months, end of treatment, and 12 months, 6-month follow-up. And here's the findings on child antisocial behavior on the y-axis. We have two groups, the green lines are the omega-3, red lines, controls, and 0 months, baseline, right? 6 months, treatment ends, 6-month follow-up at the end of treatment. Two things are happening here. Number one, placebo effect. Both groups during the treatment are coming down. Placebo effects are real, they're very important, we need to pay attention to them. But the second thing that happens is that when the treatment ends in the control group, they go back to where they were coming from, whereas the omega-3 group continue to decline. So, you know, some indication that manipulating omega-3 consumption can reduce aggressive behavior. One way of boosting the brain from a positive psychology perspective in the way. I was talking to you about these data actually earlier. So there's a finding we had that we didn't predict, and that's parents. That the parents' antisocial behavior goes down if their kid was taking omega-3. So these are scores of psychopathy checkers from the parents. The green line are the scores of the parents' scores. The green line, these parents have kids taking omega-3. And they're improving. So it's not just that the kids are improving, but the parents are improving. Again, we did not predict that. Post hoc, we can think of two scenarios. One thing, what I mentioned, is reciprocal parent-child relationships. If your child is behaving better, then the parent chills out a little bit, you know, relaxes a little bit. They do less flying off the handle because their kid is easier to deal with. So that might be why the parent's behavior is improving. The counter hypothesis, which we can't test, is that what's happening is that antisocial parents are stealing their child's drink. They take the omega-3, and it's the omega-3 that's directly accounting for their improved behavior and not the reciprocal parent-child effect. So right now we're trying to test that in a further study in Mauritius by doing a double dosing. Either the kid gets omega-3 or not, and the parent gets omega-3 or not. So that's the study that I'm doing right now in Mauritius. Looking to see whether it's when both parent and child get the omega-3 that's when we can maximally improve behaviour in a child. And this is just some data from Philadelphia here, which is, it's a bit complicated. So again, antisocial behaviour, the y-axis, 0 months, 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. So this is a 3-month intervention. We've got 4 groups. The green line just get cognitive behaviour therapy. The red line just get omega-3. The blue line get a combo treatment, omega-3 plus cognitive behaviour therapy. The green line are the controls who don't get a B. They get nothing. What we get there is that we get a little bit of an effect for the combination. So the blue line are the ones going down, and they're the ones who get the combination of omega-3 with cognitive behaviour therapy. So could it possibly be that omega-3 could be an adjunct treatment which enhances brain functioning to help a kid better take on board lessons from cognitive behaviour therapy? I'm not sure if that's going to be true or not, but that's an indication from that study. Okay, I don't think you would crucify me for trying to improve nutrition in children. You'd say, all right, we'll let you do that. But what about going directly into the brain using transcranial direct current stimulation? So this is a recent finding from my graduate student, Olivia Choi. That's just came out last week in Journal Neuroscience. So it's a double-blind, stratified, randomized controlled trial. She has 40 in the transcranial direct current group and 42 get the sham treatment. So you get the electrode slapped on your head, we pass the electrical current to the electrode to try and upregulate the prefrontal cortex there. That activity there. The next day, Olivia brings them back into the laboratory and she gives them a social vignette of physical assault and a social vignette of sexual assault. What's that? Social vignette of physical assault is like this. You're in a bar with your girlfriend and you go to the toilet, and when you come back, some other guy's hitting on your girlfriend. God, what's this? What's he doing there? I mean, you're feeling really upset, and worst of all, look at her. She seems to be enjoying it. Now, she's not really bad, and you say, yeah, come on, that's my girlfriend. He says, no, she's not wearing a ring. She can speak to anyone she wants. Push comes to shove, and would you pick up the bottle and whack him on the head with it? And so she's looking at the rate of criminal intent. Would you, in this situation, commit an assault? That's the rate of assault. The green lines are the TDCS group. This is the sham control group. And she finds a reduction in the intention to commit a physical assault. She also finds a significant reduction in the intention to commit a sexual assault. So that's just a very beginning study. But would we take that further? And supposing that was really true, and supposing it changes behaviour, she didn't show it changed behaviour. Changes intention to commit behaviour. Although that's a first step, isn't it, to committing behaviour. Would we do that? Would we physically change the brains, let's say, of prisoners to try and stop them coming back to prison? Would we zap the brains of pesky, sexual offenders to try and make them perpetrate less sexually violent acts? I don't know. I'm not sure that the society is quite ready for something like that, but you may disagree. Did somebody say something, or somebody was grunting? Okay. Actually, I'm going to skip the brain in prison. Sorry, Becky. Skip that video. Sorry, Becky. I want to turn to punishment. But it's 8:10. You're all exhausted. I'm exhausted. So we need a video. That's what we have to have a video. So I want to try and circle back. You asked the free will question, didn't you? So this is a little bit for you. So, yes, for you. Right for you. Free will question coming up. Okay? So listen up here and we can have a dialogue after this. Right. The key question is this. It's the interface between neuroethics, neurolaw, and neurocriminology. If these biological impairments predisposed to antisocial, are those criminals responsible? Think of it, do they have free will? To use your vernacular. Okay, let's turn to that with a quick case study, just to finish off this evening. And it's Michael. This is Michael here. And what you need to know about Michael is 40 years old. And Michael is in his second marriage. And he's a school teacher. He used to be a correctional officer, by the way, but he got his master's degree, became a school teacher. So he's teaching kids. And importantly, he's got no prior history of any sexually deviant behaviour or any psychiatric illness. But then Michael began to change. I'll show you just again a very short video where you'll hear about the change that happened to Michael. You'll hear from Michael. You'll hear from Michael's wife about the change. And you'll also hear from Michael's stepdaughter about the change. And after that introduction, I'll finish off the story for you. But first of all, here's those individuals here.
I didn't see anymore, I didn't hear of anymore, I had no suspicions of any until February 14th. And I went to put a card, a Valentine's Day card, in his, the carrier that he took to work with him every day. And in there I saw that there was pornography. And I was horrified and so scared because you can't take porn to school. You just can't do that. You risk everything.
Michael was starting to act out of character in other more frightening ways.
It seemed as though he was just always on edge, always angry. You know, he was taking pills every day because he was having these massive headaches. And we can remember this horrible argument we had on Thanksgiving Day where he grabbed my hair and actually pulled out, you know, some of my hair. And it was at that point I called a counselor and said, you know, we need some help.
In the months which followed, the stepfather, husband, and high school teacher began to lead a double life.
A ball rolling downhill. It just gained speed. Pornography and strip clubs accelerated and expanded to massage parlors. But all of this is a desire towards grown women.
And then in May, I found a magazine called Barely Legal, which showed young girls who supposedly are legal, but frankly look like they're 13, 14 years old. And I was absolutely furious. I took Christina, she and I went to my mother's to stay with her for a couple of weeks while I thought about what to do. Just sort of like this kind of look of, what?
Anne's daughter Christina was 12 years old when she too started to notice changes in Michael's behaviour.
Like, I've always been really, really close to my parents. They would lay down with me at night before I would go to sleep and maybe like sing me a lullaby or something like that. And it went on until I was way old. I remember like he would lay down with me and then that's when it started. It would always happen at night.
My wife started a nighttime class 2 days a week. She didn't get home until 10 o'clock at night. But when my stepdaughter laid down with me in her pajamas, I began to, not always, but sometimes, be a little more intimate with her than I should. And somewhere deep, deep, deep in the back of my head, there was a little voice saying, you shouldn't do this. But there was a much larger voice saying, what the heck, why not?
So Michael was found guilty of child molestation and he was given a choice. He had to either go to prison or he could go into treatment. And so Michael opted, I think as the rest of us would do, he opted to go into treatment. But in the treatment program, he began to sexually proposition other women. And so they threw him out. Because of that, Michael had to go to prison. The night before he was due to go to prison, he developed a terrible headache. Although we would too, because he's going to prison, he's going to be a paedophile, he's going to be the lowest of low in prison. So Michael went to the emergency hospital complaining of a terrible headache and complaining he was suicidal. So they admitted him into the psychiatric ward under the diagnosis of paedophile. In the hospital, again, he began to sexually proposition female nurses. And on one occasion, he wet his trousers and showed no emotion, no embarrassment, no shame. So an astute neurologist noted that and decided to have him brain scanned. And what they found is, if you focus your attention on the middle here, this is a coronal cut, you head on to the individual. This is a structural scan. They saw a tumour growing from the very base of the prefrontal cortex, the orbitofrontal cortex, compressing the prefrontal cortex. So the neurosurgeons resected the tumour, they took it out. And it was like night and day for Michael, because he was like a different person. His emotions came back, he felt very sorry for the situation that he got his stepdaughter in and his wife. All the sexual feelings and urges went. So they put him back into the treatment program, and this time he completed it successfully because he didn't have those urges anymore. And he went back to live with his wife and his stepdaughter. It's only a case study, it's only one person, but it's intriguing, isn't it? It's an intriguing one where, you know, you're going from normality to brain tumor, to paedophilia, to resection of the brain tumor, and for that pendulum to swing all the way back to normal. And, you know, it should have been a happily ever after story, but after 6 months, the headaches came back. And his wife found child pornography on his computer. And this time she divorced him. She could not risk Christina, her daughter, living with him. But Michael was taken back to hospital and they re-scanned him. They found a tumour had grown back. So they took out the tumour for the second time. And for 6 years since then, Michael has been really quite normal. So it raises a question, going to your question of free will and responsibility. And it's a question I have for all of you. The question is Michael responsible? You're on the jury, this is the case, and I want to hear your verdict. Is he responsible for the paedophilia? I want you to think about that now. I know it will be a snap decision, but I want you to put up your hand if you would not find Michael responsible. Please put up your hand if you would not find Michael responsible. 1, 2, 3, 4, more hands probably. Thank you, hands down. Hands up if you would find Michael responsible. Okay, hands down, so it's about 50-50 then, and a lot of people are floating votes, they're not really sure what to do with their hands. At least in American law, Michael is responsible, and because he has what we call rational capacity. It's a legal term. Rational capacity, you need two things to have rational capacity. You've got to know what you're doing, and you've got to know that what you're doing was wrong. Does anyone remember the last thing Michael said in that video? Anyone remember what Michael said, which shows his rational capacity?
There was a small voice.
A little voice
At the back of his
back in my head. What did it say?
That he shouldn't be doing it.
Shouldn't do this, Michael.
Yeah, but that is also a bigger voice.
Much bigger voice at the front saying, what the heck, why not? Right, so Michael knew what he was doing, he knew what he was doing was wrong. Michael actually is responsible in the eyes of the law. Even Michael said, look, I did it. Blame me, I'm responsible. But is that justice? I go back to that question of, is that our core concept of justice? I'm not sure about that. I mean, even Michael says, should I be held as accountable for doing what I did compared to somebody who did the same thing without a tumour? I don't think so. And I agree with Michael. I think there is a difference here. And so, you know, Michael lacked that, I think, emotional capacity. The emotions wet his trousers, didn't have any shame. Something had gone in the prefrontal cortex there that maybe gave him that sense of self and embarrassment, shame and guilt, which was wiped away. So I wonder whether in the legal context we should take not just cognitive capacity into account, but also emotional capacity. And then we can ask the question, what about other people with the same sort of brain dysfunction that's not treatable, but it's present? This is a man, Dr. Page, who raped and murdered this beautiful young woman, and I defended him. I had him brain scanned. I brought him back to the brain scanner that would scan those other murderers, and compared his brain scan to 63 average normal controls. And you've got a bird's eye view, and Dr. Page has distinctly poor functioning, again, in that prefrontal cortex, the orbital frontal cortex. He's facing the death penalty. I gave a biosocial argument saying not just its brain impairment, but he had a terrible social history too. And in Denver, the three-judge panel bought the biosocial argument that this is an individual who, to use a term, had constraints on his freedom of will. And so he was spared the death penalty. But my question is that the right way to go in life? If you buy into the arguments I gave, where goes responsibility? Because I think we can always find a cause for behaviour, ultimately. But just because we find a cause to behaviour, should that excuse it? Finding the cause to Dr. Page's behaviour here, and I'm arguing he's just a puppet on a script, and he has really no free will. And I'm just worried a little bit about where these arguments can go in terms of excusing people, because at some level, and I'm just speaking as a person and as a scientist, I believe we need responsibility in society. And yet work of the type that I'm doing and other people is doing, I think is eroding our concepts of free will. I'm not quite sure what we do with that. I've been talking to summarize, we've been talking about early biological risk factors, which I would say, going to your point again, constrain freedom of will. Brain mechanisms involved, there's more than these two. Just skating on ice here, it's a lot more complex than I've described. Legal and societal implications, well, can we use these techniques to reduce violence? Can we use biology to better predict who amongst us are dangerous and need intervention? And as Portia said in The Merchant of Venice, should mercy season justice? Should our understanding of the root causes of crime lead us to a more merciful perspective when it comes to punishment and responsibility? Very finally, we have this wonderful scientist right in the front here, tomorrow giving you a great show of empathy and kindness, and moving from antisocial to prosocial. But before that evening, and mark your calendars right now, it's the top ticket in town, I have to say. Not to be missed. But we have 6 minutes for any comments, any questions that you have with anything I said. Number one, in the yellow shirt. What team is that? You're going to get knowing what team is for. Okay,
you've done a lot of experiments and studies, and most of them are experimental design. I would like to know the difference between the experimental and the practical.
Are you asking the ethical question? Okay, it's not the scientific question. So the question is, in the experimental work that we do, how do we justify helping some kids to not get it? Well, I think the way I do it is at the beginning, we don't really know if omega-3 is going to help kids reduce their aggressive behavior. What we need to do an experimental study to find out that information. I think that's my justification. I think the other point is the study goes to a human subjects board first for ethical approval. They're the professionals. They know risks and benefits. They know are they weighed appropriately. They are asking, can any harm come to the control group? And I don't think we're doing anything to harm the control group. So, at that level, I would say it's ethical and actually don't really have anything to answer to. But I'd love you to give me your mindset about, because you think I do have something to answer for in my Frankensteinish research, for example, perhaps like TDCS. But tell us more about your ethical concerns. It's good that you're raising it.
In the nutrition enrichment studies?
Yeah. Is that the omega-3 one, or is it the earlier one in Mauritius? Like
The earliest.
the earlier one, better nutrition, more physical exercise, cognitive stimulation. Yeah.
And in the end, you find out the control group engage in more criminal activities, and that concerns me because you would like that.
Yeah, so the concern is that in the control group, who didn't get any intervention, you have X amount of crime, which is base rate. That's what would happen with anyone who's not in the treatment study. That's just normative for the country. What we're doing in the enrichment group is showing a reduction. Right? So we give something to one group of kids and we show that this comes. And the reason for doing that is we want to see, can these enrichments reduce crime? And unless we do the study, we'll never know. Because the alternative is just giving the control group exactly the same, pretty well. And then you'll never find out anything. That means no research, no science. We can't guide society in terms of best practices. That would be how I answer. But tell me a bit more. Well, what would your counter be to my response?
I don't know. It's
No.
really difficult.
Yeah. Because you can ask us, in terms of ethics, there's a lot of hungry kids in Africa. What are we all doing about it? We're doing bugger all. So where's the ethics for us? Outside ourselves. We're not doing what we could do. We could do a lot more. But we're very unethical people. I'm going to try and cut that. What people do is in the control group, they give some sort of token intervention, which basically is going nowhere, and the researchers know it's not going to do a damn bit of good to the control group. So that's how it gets to new research experts. But just to say, I think that the back point is that Human Subjects Board approves research like this. All those obligatory studies, do. What other questions? So that was a good question. Yeah.
So about the prefrontal and amygdala protection, do you think they are good protection about antisocial behavior and antisocial person and all? Because the prefrontal thing in a stage with it's like outrageous behavior that easily goes on people, and someone like Jack Ripper with that control behavior, they can easily catch people as well. So it's kind of, do you think it is more like a structural thing, maybe the connectivity between amygdala and the prefrontal?
Good. You're raising something I'm not talking about. Is connectivity between the orbitofrontal cortex and the amygdala that may be much more important than either of them. Absolutely, and there's more and more research being done on that, and I haven't mentioned that, and I have to say there's a lot of brain imaging research that I've not really had an opportunity to get at. What I've described, just to repeat, has been simplistic. There's a lot more to the neurobiology of crime and violence than either the amygdala or the prefrontal cortex. Brain is highly complex. And then that's just still one piece. What about the social pieces, the psychological pieces, the sociological pieces? I look at violence as a jigsaw puzzle, lots of different pieces. And that amygdala and prefrontal are just two pieces of a much more complex jigsaw puzzle. Our challenge is to find out all the pieces in the jigsaw puzzle, turn them over, identify them, and that's just the beginning. The next stage is putting the pieces together to see how they fit. How social factors combine with biological to predispose to violence, as per the example of birth complications, combined with maternal rejection, leading to that threefold increase in bias. And we're 30 seconds over. Oh, I'm sorry.
But let's give a big hand. We all have stimulated to have a lot of questions. As I was a student, to learn from Adrian, and I have always have a lot of questions stimulated by his talk and presentation as well. So, but before you go, we would like you to invite you guys to take a group photo with us. Just to take a group photo as a record, and to thank you guys for coming. And also before we take the group photo, we would like to present a souvenir to our honorable speaker, Raine, Professor Adrian Raine, and also another speaker who will be speaking tomorrow. And on Wednesday, we have more fruitful seminars to come in the next 2 days. So please, we encourage you guys to come attend those. Attend 3 more sessions of the 3-day courses. So let's invite Dr. Kalina Nehaska, right? Am I pronouncing it right? Right, to come and take a photo with us, and also we will present these souvenirs. And we would like to invite you guys to take the photo, so please stay in line for just a little bit. Thank you very much. And we will also have the evaluation form on your table. If you have a question, if you have application, you can fill that out. Thank you very much. And we will take a photo first, and then we'll take a photo.
Cheese for Donald.
So you guys can sit in your seats, and then we will take a photo. Sit together. Feel free to take a seat.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. One more photo. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for coming. And if you have any questions, you can stay behind and ask Professor Adrian Raine. And also, please leave the evaluation form on the desk or at the reception.